So it could be confusing, but the Canon and Sony lineup of mirrorless cameras, there's loads of numbers there. We're going to look at a couple of them and find out the difference between the R5 and also what's the comparable Sony camera to the Canon mirrorless R5 camera. While looking at some of the specs, this is what I've come up with. I'm thinking the a7R3 is the most equivalent to the Canon EOS R5. Reason being, they're both mirrorless cameras, magnesium alloy body. They're kind of close in terms of megapixels. The Sony is 42 megapixels, the EOS R5 is 45. So if you're doing any type of landscape photography where your megapixels are very important, you want to crop in, then you've got effective option there for you. The equivalent of these come at the lower megapixel option, which we'll cover as well. So looking here, full frame cameras, mirrorless, new technology. The best thing here is you've got in-camera stabilization. You will be aware Sony does 5.5 stops and the a7R3. Well, guess what? R5 does 8 stops, so you know it's trumping you a little bit there, Sony. Sony makes some great cameras. Canon are just about catching up on mirrorless, where they're making decent cameras now, or trying to. And carrying on down here, what we got? I want to look at video. Ooh, 20 frames a second, continuous photos in the R5 versus 10 for the a7R. Interesting. 4K, what we saying? Oh, okay. Sony a7 III 4K, R5 8K mate at 30 frames a second. And then you've got, I'm just looking through this to find out what the 4K 120 frames a second in 4K on the R5. That would be some not buttery smooth, but it'll be really smooth. That's like equivalent to the Sony's 1080p at 120. Interesting. So that's not a bad option there, but I think that's alright. So looking at that, that's the R5. Most equivalent a7R3. What about we look at the next option? What's the most equivalent Canon EOS R6 in Sony? There's a couple of options out there. Let's have a quick look at it and see what we got. So we already looked at the A7s. Let's get rid of those with the R5. But now we want to compare the R6. So R6 is going to be comparable to the A7S III based on the specs. 20 megapixels on the R6. The A7S III is like a lower megapixel version of the A7R3, which is basically if you want more megapixels buy the R version, if you want less buy the S version. And looking down these specs, we are saying that they are both going to be similar. However, the R6 does have 8 stops of in-camera stabilization versus the 5.5 of A7S. What else is down here? Fully articulating screens on both, good. And then we're saying 10 frames a second on the A7 from Sony if you do continuous photos versus 20 on the EOS R6. And video 4K at 120 frames a second on the A7S III, which is actually better than the R6. So that's a good option there. However, if you want high frame rates, you'll need to go to the R5 camera, which we looked at earlier. But then that does come with this price point. So considering that, this is giving you a bit of information about the main key factors and the main differences I'm spotting. There are additional things about how the camera feels and how it looks when you actually use it. So the specs aren't always the best option. But if you're currently shopping around, this video will help you basically find all the little specs and differences between them. So hopefully that helped you. I have got another video here comparing cameras, so make sure to check that playlist out and I'll see you on that video.